Thanks so much for coming out to this panel and sticking around for this long. We're going to be talking about preventing animal suffering today. And I'm Scott Weathers. I'm a grad student in global health at Harvard. I'm just going to give quickly bios of everyone on this panel, and then we're going to talk for about 20 or 25 minutes, and then we'll hand it off to Q&A so that y'all can ask all sorts of questions. So just to start off, Jason to my left is Vice President of Operations at MaxMind, which is a Boston-based tech company that donates substantially based on effective altruist principles. He's a member of the Oversight Committee on the Animal Charity Evaluators Research Fund, and he and his wife Yulia participate in animal advocacy as donors. Next, I'm going to go to Cameron Meyer Shorb over here. So Cameron matches exceptional people with high-impact careers at the Good Food Institute, which is using markets and food technology to create a healthy, humane, and sustainable future. He also worked as a field organizer for the successful 2016 Massachusetts ballot initiative that banned the extreme confinement of farm animals. So congrats on that success. And then lastly, I'm going to go to Sofia. So Sofia, on the end here, is currently the research editor at Animal Charity Evaluators, where she oversees the completion of ACE's research content, helps to facilitate cross-departmental projects, and heads the Committee on Organizational Culture. Most recently, she's worked on 2 books and a number of op-eds, the latter of which have been published in The Atlantic, Forbes, Vox, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the LA Times. So we've got a really distinguished panel here, and I want to let them start off, just give 1 or 2 minutes of remarks. So let's start with Jason, maybe.
Okay, so the main thing that I want you to take away from my comments is that you should be skeptical of what any particular person says is the answer to reducing animal suffering, and also that includes me. So I am not providing the answers here. I do, however, believe that the most important thing we can do right now, or the most impactful thing we can do, is something that Bruce was talking about earlier, which is to help people make the choice not to eat animals, make that choice more easily, and technology is a huge part of that. Part of why I say that it's important not to take any one particular person's word as definitive on this matter is what I've experienced in being involved in animal advocacy since college, and that was starting in 2002. So I'm not as I have not been as involved as long as others, but it's been enough time to see the same ideas brought back again and again, not just by people who are new to the movement, but by large groups. And so this is like, people keep bringing up the same sorts of initiatives, same sorts of ideas kind of come back again and again, and they fail, and then people don't necessarily know what's happened before and why initiatives have failed. There's been a lot of confidence over and over that people know the answer. So if you go to different conferences year after year, you'll hear people say, now is the moment where we just know how to drive toward a vegan world, and if we just execute, we're there. And we haven't quite gotten there yet. And then also, I think it's just a really complicated issue. So you can look at public health issues where arguably there's more funding, and the behaviors that public health experts are trying to drive people toward are arguably even more closely aligned with people's interests. And it's just really hard to make progress on those particular issues. So reducing animal suffering will be a big challenge, and it's really important to listen to a lot of voices.
So one of the themes I wanted to explore today was adding nuance to the message Bruce gave at the beginning about plant-based and clean meat being this really exciting, tractable solution to the problems of animal farming. And one of my favorite questions I get is, well, what are you guys doing then? Is the problem just going to solve itself? And so basically I think it'd be interesting to explore what the role of a nonprofit is in this space, and more broadly, how do you find your comparative advantage as an effective altruism organization or an individual trying to make change? So very briefly, what that looks like for the Good Food Institute is, I actually personally believe that it could be the case that sometime in the future, without our efforts or without the efforts of someone or some organization like ours, society might eventually move away from factory farming, but the role that a nonprofit can play is we can help accelerate that change by working to remove the barriers to an efficient market that works the way we want. So a lot of the things in your economics textbook about factors that hinder market efficiency are things that we're kind of trying to deconstruct piece by piece. So anti-competitive regulation, imperfect information on the part of job seekers, these are all areas where we can expend concerted, mission-driven effort to unleash the power of the market broadly. And I think it's important that we extend those efforts now, because I think the timing of these actions really matters. Just to take one example of why the timing is so important, if we look at the effects of climate change, what we're looking at there is a lot of physical cycles that get going, and the more greenhouse gases we have in the atmosphere, the faster things change. And so the further we go down that path, the harder it is to go back. And we really want to be reversing course as soon as possible. And I think there are other arguments to be made for other aspects of our mission as to why the timing is particularly important. So that's just a brief intro into what I think the role of a nonprofit could be in this space, and why I think it's important to think about the comparative advantage and, in our case, what we can add that the private sector isn't doing right now.
Thanks, Cam. So I just wanted to really quickly, I know there are a lot of different people in the room with different backgrounds, and I wanted to quickly just overview what ACE is and what we do. So really quickly, Animal Charity Evaluators, we are an EA organization that works to find and promote the most effective ways to help animals. So there are a number of things that we do in pursuit of that goal. This includes obviously our charity evaluations, which is the sort of most popular thing that people know us for, but in addition to that, we do intervention reports, and we do foundational research, and as a result of these things, we've been able to move millions of dollars annually to effective charities, and so that's really sort of the primary function of our organization. And to be honest, I could probably talk endlessly all day about what ACE does, and there's a number of different topics we could delve into here. So I'm more than happy to talk about any facet of our work with anyone later, if you guys want to chat about that. But specifically for this panel, I think for the context of like this discussion and this conference, and given who the co-panelists are, one of the main points that I just wanted to raise today is the fact that obviously the EA movement in general is really, really excited about advancements in food technology and innovation, culture meat specifically, and obviously at ACE we're really excited about this too. GFI is one of our 3 top charities this year for the 2nd year in a row. But I think that there is a lot of conversation around this sort of question about, does social change necessarily need to come before technological and behavior change, or is it vice versa? And I really just wanted to throw out the suggestion that this is sort of a misguided framework. I think it's pretty clear that actually these things are mutually reinforcing, and so we really need to be pouring resources into a variety of approaches and take a pluralistic approach. And I think that that sort of like bigger picture point is important to make in this context. And there are, I would say, probably 4 main reasons why we need to take a pluralistic approach. The first one would be for short-term gains. So, there are millions of animals, billions, depending on, how you want to define which farm animals we're talking about at any given moment in different conversations and different contexts. Some are more relevant, but there are billions of animals suffering right here, right now. And there really are changes that we can make that are going to improve their lives. And so, when we're talking about tractability, there are some welfare improvements that we might consider small, but again, the scale of animal suffering means that, if we're able to get corporate reforms, then we're sort of able to make these changes in the here and now. We really are making tangible progress. And so short-term gains, I think, is a really important reason for this. Another one is just the fact that there is a truly pretty significant amount of uncertainty around whether and to what extent there will be consumer acceptance of cultured meat and similar products here. And I think, it's very easy for all of us in this room to be really excited about this, and I think that obviously we've, Bruce also talked about this, there's a lot of previous evidence that market-based approaches have been really successful. But there's a lot of uncertainty here. There have been studies that show a lot of people have concerns about sort of like the safety of these products and sort of like the health implications. And so that's something to keep in mind, is that we definitely don't want to be putting all of our eggs in one basket. In addition to that, a lot of the other interventions that we can undertake are really going to be in service of making social change and kind of moving the needle forward on moral progress. And that in turn is going to increase the receptivity to these types of products. So I think that, like, again, really mutually reinforcing. It's really important to kind of like delve into all of these areas. And I think that like the last point is, less case specific, but in general, I think we want to keep in mind that ending factory farming is not really the end goal. So this is obviously something that we're all working really hard to achieve. We want to see it happen. But once we end factory farming, we really want to have positioned ourselves such that our society is going to sort of value alleviating suffering for all sentient beings, which means we can turn our attention to wild animal suffering. It means we can turn our attention to, the suffering of maybe sentient AI and whatever else. So I think that, again, taking a variety of approaches, it really allows us to kind of create improvements for the far future as well.
Thanks, Sophia. Well, I'd love to start with sort of the donor perspective. And Sophia, maybe could you give us a sense of the interventions that ACE thinks are most effective and why ACE has come to those recommendations?
Sure. So one of the first things I would start off with is we definitely do have a sense at this point. We've done, a lot of research. We do have a sense of some interventions that we think are more effective than others. And so, to that tune, we will say things like we think working on corporate campaigns is more effective than, say, online ads, things like that. But even those interventions that we have studied, there is, again, we obviously in the EA world, it's almost like we don't need to say it. We always know there's tons of uncertainty everywhere all the time. We always need more research. But I think it really does really serve us to emphasize that point. So ACE, we actually have a page on our website where we talk about which interventions we have considered and which ones we have yet to consider. So, the ones that we have considered, again, we think corporate campaigns are really important, and we have some of our top recommended charities like THL, Compassion World Farming doing really good work on stuff like that. We have a little bit less confidence in interventions such as leafleting. We recently updated our report on leafleting and are less confident that it's effective than we were in the past. We're currently working on doing a legal work intervention report and updating our corporate reforms intervention report. And we're also doing a project on some interventions that might work for farm fish. So all that stuff is in the works. I think one really cool thing that we've done recently is we've started to think of interventions in terms of how they affect what we're calling a menu of outcomes. So we kind of see this menu of outcomes in the animal advocacy space as containing influencing public opinion, influencing industry, influencing law and policy, and then also building alliances and building capacity. And those are sometimes defined as sort of the same thing or two separate things, depending. But I think it's really important to recognize that different interventions have different sort of effects on these different outcomes. And all these outcomes are things that we want to see happen. And so that just serves to reinforce the point that we kind of need to be pursuing a whole host of interventions. And even though there's a lot of uncertainty, I think one of the things we can be fairly certain about is that the most effective approach is going to involve a combination of these approaches so that they are complementing each other and sort of enhancing the effects.
Good, thanks. I'd love to hear from Jason as well. Jason's been a major donor to several advocacy organizations and early clean meat and plant-based startups. So I'd love to hear, how does your donation strategy differ from or is similar to ACE's approach?
Well, so I think that I guess ACE's approach is it's not solely focused on technology. They're looking at a number of different strategies. And I guess I haven't been as persuaded of ACE's recommendations as more of a focus on technology because it's harder for me to see a direct line from some of the welfare campaigning to a world where animals aren't used as I can from improvements in technology. But that said, with respect to technology, there's just so much that needs to be done. It's not a small thing. So where I've looked to some of the mapping of the technological concerns and ideas and supply issues that GFI has put together. I tried to talk with as many people, basically I just tried to talk to as many people as I can who are involved in the industry, the various industries, and who are connected to research about what the needs are. And so that's led to thinking about like shelf placement, distribution issues, cutting deals, like being able to negotiate deals with grocery store chains, lobbying and understanding lobbying and regulatory issues, and sometimes the groups and the people who are best positioned to work on these things don't necessarily have the platform, like a platform to really make you aware, unless you were to go out and do your own research and like have those kinds of conversations. Like I think ACE could be in a position to popularize them. I'm not sure that there's any other organization in the animal advocacy movement that could do that right now, but you know, the process is they make recommendations once a year. And so you're not necessarily going to hear that, say, the Plant-Based Food Association has something like really interesting coming up, and if you're like the kind of donor who can help fund a particular project that they might work on, you wouldn't know about it unless you were had a network of donors you were connected to. So like that's the kind of thing that I'm trying to pursue, is just maintaining awareness of the different options that are available, kind of so that I can talk to other people who donate and also make my own donation or make my own donations based on.
Great, thanks. So I guess like both as donors, but also as a movement, you know, how should we think about prioritizing and seeing the relationship between funding advocacy as well as clean meat and plant-based products? You know, how should we prioritize and see the relationship between those two things? This is great.
I'm sure that the place to strike the balance is that's an art. I don't know that you'd be able to figure it out with any precision, but I totally agree with Sophia that we'll need work on all the different areas. We'll need to persuade people. We'll need to maintain kind of strong moral narratives around like why we should move in these directions, why people should be concerned about animals. But that said, as much as you try to convince people, like we just need to have the products available for people to make the choices. And so even for as someone who is vegan, like trying to find like a vegan restaurant in the area, it's like way easier than it was 10 years ago, but it's still not that easy. And it's not like you can just go to any restaurant with colleagues or family or friends and find things that don't include animals. So it just seems to me like the overwhelming emphasis should be on getting that stuff out there so that the environment is different and you just have the ability to make other kinds of changes.
Okay. So one of the things I guess that has happened on clean meat and plant-based products is that they've gotten a lot of momentum in recent years. And advocates for these products and these companies really like to point that out as evidence of their success. But doesn't that mean that potentially these products would go on the market even without our help? You know, why should we be putting resources towards these products and these companies if there's a market reason for them to exist, I guess?
Yeah, thank you. That's kind of what I was getting at in my opening remarks. Basically, I think, again, I would stress those two major points. One, the timing of when these changes take place is incredibly important. A single second of factory farming is responsible for millions of beings in extreme pain, and I haven't done the math for the greenhouse gas emissions, etc. But you can imagine this is a problem that operates at such a scale that just ending it a little bit sooner would be worthy of putting on one's gravestone. It would be a life accomplishment. And then the other thing we want to talk about is what Jason was just bringing up about all of these pivot points or accelerators. I think broadly it's safe to say that there is momentum going here, but in the narrow sense of when are these products going to be on the shelves, and are they going to reach 10% of the market, like plant-based milks have now, and then level off there among some, interested group of consumers, or are they going to get to 50% or 90 or 99? I think those are the things that are going to be influenced by how friendly we can make, or how fair we can make the playing field legislatively and regulatorily for these products, whether they have to jump through unreasonable hoops to certification, or whether there's confusing standards about how they have to be labeled. Those are things that could really set them back. And again, just the number of companies out there and the quality of the products there will really determine how far this change gets. And so I think we need to be really putting the pedal to the metal on all aspects of accelerating this change.
Great, thanks. Sophia, does ACE have a position in terms of prioritizing between these two things, between funding advocacy and sort of improving the pace, the quality of products that are plant-based and clean meat products that are on the market today, and raising the number of companies that exist?
So we don't currently have a breakdown as far as something numerical that we could provide. I think that currently we're working on a project about the allocation of resources in the movement. So just trying to sort of survey those and get a sense of like how organizations are kind of apportioning their resources towards different interventions and towards different outcomes by virtue of focusing on those interventions. And so we certainly have like preliminary results along the lines of noticing that not as many resources are going to things like protesting as we think probably could, given our recent update in the effectiveness. And again, going back to sort of like the outcomes that correlate with interventions, one of the things that I think has been interesting for us to discover recently is that sometimes interventions are correlated with outcomes that are perhaps less intuitive. So something like protests, you might think that the primary outcome is influencing public opinion, but actually this has a much more profound effect on building capacity in the movement and building alliances. And so I think it's really important for us to be spending the time looking into these effects so that we can, the more information we gather about that, the better, the more informed we can be as to make these decisions, right, of how we should be allocating resources. And again, we certainly are very excited about culture, meat, and food technology, and so I don't need to be the naysayer on the panel in that sense. Of course, I sort of want to bring in the point that we need to focus on other things, but again, clearly, GFI is a top charity, and we think this is a really, really important place for us to be putting resources. But I think projects like this allocation study are going to be what allow us to get a more refined sense of how we can answer that question specifically.
Great, thanks. I want to open it up for questions, but I just have one more question for any of y'all to answer. So I'm curious, what do you see within your fields as sort of the major unresolved questions, either in plant-based and clean meat or in advocacy, the things that we don't understand that would, if we did know the answer to, it would really allow us to have the biggest impact for animals?
I'll start. There's running through the list. There are so many questions, technical, logistical, political, that we're trying to sort out right now. But one that I want to draw attention to, just on the technical side, is unlocking the power of plant proteins and plant molecules more broadly. It is really astounding of all the plant species that grow on Earth, how few of them we farm at any scale. And then even among those few, there's really only a handful that we farm at very large scales. And then of that handful, those are used almost exclusively for animal feed purposes, and they're optimized for those purposes. So we have decades and decades and decades of massive government investment in, and there's tremendous scientific capital being put towards optimizing these plants for one particular use, and that's what the plant-based meat industry has been working with so far. So just the sheer amount of low-hanging scientific fruit here of the things we could discover if we start systematically exploring other, not only other species, but even just other strains of crops we already grow at scale. We already have infrastructure to process, and then understanding the functional capacities of the different protein fractions within them, I think is astounding. And one of the things that gives me the most hope in terms of all the possibilities that are out there. So that'd be my question is, what can we do with these plants?
Yeah, I agree with Cam. I think there's just an absolutely huge number of questions here. I would just add one that I'm like personally really interested in. I think that we. Again, I can talk more about a lot of basic recommended charities to anyone who wants to hear me talk about them forever. But I will just throw out there that we have a lot of people pay attention to our 3 top charities all the time. Not a lot of people talk about our standout charities. We have 8 standout charities right now, all doing really, really interesting work in a variety of areas. So we have Analytics that does most of the work just on research and sort of a meta organization, the way that ACE is. In a sense, and then we have organizations like NHRP, which are working on getting legal personhood for non-human animals. To me, the legal arena is somewhere where I would really, really like to see a lot more questions answered, just because that type of intervention is something that is so much more long-term. Things like the corporate reforms and those sort of measures, it's pretty, they operate on a relatively quick scale. So it's sort of easy for us to kind of put things in place and look at the effects and evaluate them in that sense. But something that is really aiming for a longer term societal shift, like this legal work, is super interesting to me, and I would really love for there to be more people kind of taking up those questions of like how worth it is to put resources in here, and what kind of outcomes can we expect, and how might those changes kind of trickle down to the other goals that we're trying to achieve.
Related to what Cameron was saying, I think there's just so much to learn, and one thing that I think would be really, that's just on my mind, and I don't know the answer to, I wish someone would tell me, is like, how do we legitimize the research on plant-based and meat alternatives and culture meat within academia, and such that we have more programs educating people, and then also academics want to focus greater parts of their whole careers on it. It just seems like that's something we should be doing, and it shouldn't just be something that's happening in private industry, this type of research. But it also just seems very hard, and so like New Harvest has been trying to fund research and researchers for a while, but they only have so many, there are only so many labs, and I know that GFI has explored this a little bit as well. How do we make this a field? I mean, you can go and study bakery science in Kansas State, but I mean, how can you go and study the kinds of things you need to produce better plant-based foods and clean meat as well?
Great, thanks. So I think